No, he has no idea. He's a sweet old man, a walking ATM. He thinks we're buying it together. Honestly, just a couple more years of this, and the apartment is all mine, free and clear. I just have to keep him happy. For 6 months, I paid a tutor on Preply 3 times a week to teach me a language my girlfriend never knew I was learning. It cost me about $900 in total. But the price of not understanding her would have been my entire future. But to understand how I ended up in that cafe, sitting at a little iron table in the afternoon sun, listening to a language I was never supposed to know, you have to understand who I was before all this. Before Elena. Before Romania. You have to go back to Flint, Michigan, and to a version of me that felt like a completely different person. For 40 years, I worked at the General Motors plant. I wasn't some executive. I was an assembly line supervisor. I managed a team of 30 people. My job wasn't about spreadsheets or PowerPoints. It was about looking a man in the eye and knowing if he was having a good day or a bad one. It was about knowing who needed a kick in the pants and who needed a quiet word of encouragement. It was about walking the floor every morning and feeling, not just seeing, when something was off. A machine running a quarter second slow. A worker who wasn't talking like he usually did. A sound that was almost right, but not quite. I was good at it. You don't last 40 years in a place like that if you can't read people and systems. The plant taught me that everything, every machine, every process, every human relationship has a logic to it. And when the logic breaks down, there's always a reason. You just have to find it. My life was built on that same foundation. Methodical, practical, deliberate. My wife, Susan, used to joke that I could find the flaw in any system, whether it was a rattling engine block or a leaky faucet under the kitchen sink. She wasn't wrong. We had a good life. A real one. We raised 2 kids in a small house that we owned, free and clear. I put money into my 401k every single payday, without fail, from the day I started until the day I retired. I drove the same truck for 11 years because it ran fine and I had better things to do with my money. When I punched out for the last time, I was financially secure. Not rich, not by a long shot, but between the sale of that house, my retirement account, and my GM pension of $2,200 a month, my net worth was about $650,000. I had done everything right. Then Susan got sick. For the last 2 years of her life, I was her full-time caregiver. I learned things about patience and grief and love that I never wanted to know. And 5 years ago, she was gone. The silence in that house was the loudest thing I'd ever heard in my life. The kids were grown, living their own lives out of state, as they should. But I was just adrift, rattling around in an empty house in a city that felt emptier every year, in a country that seemed to have no particular use for a retired assembly line supervisor with a quiet disposition and a good work ethic. I was 62 years old and felt completely invisible. Not angry, not bitter, just erased. The final push came during a particularly brutal Michigan winter. I was snowed in for a week straight. Just me and the 4 walls and the sound of the wind off Lake Huron. I started watching these YouTube videos, one after another, falling down rabbit hole after rabbit hole. American guys like me, regular, working-class guys, who had moved to the Philippines or Colombia or Thailand or Portugal. They looked happy, actually, genuinely happy. They had wives who cooked for them. They were respected in their communities. They were living on a fraction of what it cost to just exist back home. They had purpose again. One day, a younger guy I used to work with on the floor posted photos from Medellin, Colombia. He had a new wife, a new life, this huge, wide-open smile on his face. He looked 10 years younger. And I thought, sitting there in the gray Michigan dark, that's it. My life isn't over. I wanted that. I wanted to feel valued again, not for my pension or my zip code, but for being a loyal, steady, decent man, the kind of man I had always been. I tried dating locally first. It was a disaster, and I say that without bitterness. It felt like every woman my age was either still processing a divorce or had a list of requirements a mile long. In their eyes, I was just another old guy with a pension and too much time on his hands. It felt transactional in a way I hadn't expected, so I went online. I found an international dating site, and that's where I met her. Elena, 45 years old, from a city called Brașov in the Transylvania region of Romania. Her profile was like someone had read my mind and written it back to me. She said she was a traditional woman. She said she was tired of local men who didn't know how to commit, who played games, who didn't value stability. She said she just wanted a loyal, steady partner to build a simple life with. Her emails, and she wrote long, thoughtful, beautiful emails, felt like poetry. She wrote about home-cooked Sunday meals, about sitting on a balcony and watching the mountains, about how she had always believed in the kind of love that was quiet and reliable, not loud and dramatic. For 6 months, we had video calls nearly every day. She listened to me. She asked about my work, about Susan, about my kids, about my life at the plant. She made me feel seen. She made me feel like the man I used to be, and maybe always still was, underneath the loneliness and the grief. It didn't feel like a risk. It felt, if I'm being completely honest, like the most logical decision I had made in years. So I did it. I sold the house I'd lived in for 35 years. I liquidated part of my retirement fund. I got my paperwork in order, and I bought a one-way ticket to Bucharest with a connecting bus to Brașov to build a new life with a woman I had met on the internet. When I tell it like that, I can hear how it sounds. But you have to understand, at the time, it felt like the bravest, smartest thing I'd ever done. When I first landed in Romania, the first year was like a dream. Brașov is a genuinely beautiful city, nestled right up against the Carpathian Mountains. Gothic church towers, cobblestone squares, snow on the peaks even in late spring. And Elena was everything she had promised to be. Attentive, warm, affectionate. She met me at the door every evening. She introduced me to her friends with pride. My GM pension, that $2,200 a month that barely kept the heat on back in Michigan, felt like genuine wealth in Romania. We could eat a full dinner at a nice restaurant for $10. We went on weekend trips to castles in the mountains. Life was good. I felt young again. I felt like Mark, not just some old widower rattling around in a cold house. The financial requests started slowly, and they were calibrated so precisely that I want you to pay close attention to this part, because this is where the architecture of the trap becomes visible only in hindsight. The first request was about the apartment. We were renting a small one-bedroom, which was comfortable, but she had a vision for our future together. "My love," she said one evening, sitting across from me with that warm, serious look she did so well. "This is nice, but it's not a home. Not really. Not a home for a family, for a real future." She'd already found it, of course. A larger place in a better part of the city. 2 bedrooms, a balcony overlooking the rooftops, a view toward the mountains. She said the deposit and the first year's rent came to $12,000. And it made sense. Of course it made sense. I was there to build a new life. Why would I quibble over making that life more comfortable? I sent the money. It felt good. It felt like I was doing what a provider does. A few months later came the second request, and this one was engineered to be impossible to refuse. A phone call in the middle of the night. Her voice cracked and frightened. Her mother, who lived in a village a few hours away, had suffered a medical emergency. She said her mother needed surgery, that the public hospital system was overwhelmed and unreliable, and a private clinic was the only option. The cost, $5,000. Look, I spent 2 years as the primary caregiver for my dying wife. You do not hesitate when someone's family member is sick, to have paused, to have said, "Can you send me some documentation?" That would have made me feel like a monster. So I gave her the money, immediately and without reservation. I felt righteous doing it. I felt like a good man taking care of his family. That feeling of being needed, of being decent and generous, is a powerful thing. I understand now that it was designed to be. The third and final request came about 8 months later, over a celebratory dinner at one of her favorite restaurants. Good wine, candlelight. She took my hand across the table and said she had something exciting to show me. She'd found an apartment for sale, not for rent, for sale. Our own place. A beautiful unit in one of the best neighborhoods in the city. Mountain views. Good square footage. The price was $85,000. In any American city, that same apartment would be $500,000, easily. It felt like the deal of a lifetime. But then came the catch. She explained it all so carefully, holding my hand, her eyes completely sincere. The process for buying property in Romania as a foreign national was a bureaucratic nightmare, she said. A year or more, lawyers, notaries, endless government offices. But for a Romanian citizen, she snapped her fingers. Fast and clean. "The plan is straightforward, my love," she said. "We put the apartment in my name for now, just to avoid the bureaucracy. And the moment we are married, which we will be soon, we go straight to the notary and add your name to the title. It will be our home. This is just a technicality. And that's when it happened. Just for a second, a fraction of a second, the old me surfaced. The assembly line supervisor. The guy whose entire professional life was built around spotting the one detail that broke the logic of everything around it. Something felt off. The structure of the arrangement felt off. My gut knew it before my brain did. But I smothered it, because at that point I was in so deep I couldn't afford to see it clearly. I'd sold my house. I'd moved to another continent. I'd already handed over $17,000 and a year and a half of my life. To question her now would be to admit I had been a fool. My hope was too strong and my pride too fragile. Believing her was easier. So I wired $85,000 to her account. The crack in the facade didn't appear because of money. It came from something small. The kind of detail you could only catch if you'd spent 40 years training yourself to notice what doesn't fit. About a week after I'd transferred the funds for the apartment, we were at one of her favorite outdoor cafes in the city center. A young waiter, no more than 19 years old, was refilling Elena's water glass and caught the edge with the pitcher, spilling a small amount, maybe half a tablespoon, onto the white tablecloth. He was mortified, immediately apologetic, dabbing at it with a cloth, head bowed, clearly embarrassed. A normal person says, "Don't worry about it," and moves on. What Elena did instead stopped me cold. The warmth drained out of her face like water out of a tub. Her voice, when she spoke to him in Romanian, dropped to something I can only describe as contemptuous. Quiet, precise, and absolutely withering. I didn't understand the words, but I have spent my entire adult life reading tone, reading body language, reading the invisible language of human interaction on a factory floor. The tone she used was the tone of someone who believes the person in front of them is beneath contempt. The waiter looked like he'd been struck. He retreated as quickly as he could. Elena looked back at me, and the warmth returned to her face instantly, like flipping a switch. She smiled and said something about the service not being what it used to be, and I smiled back. But something inside me didn't come back from that moment. The gut feeling I'd smothered at the dinner table had just gotten its first piece of evidence. I didn't confront her. My entire career taught me that you never, ever walk into a confrontation without data. Anger is not a strategy. If I accused her of anything, she would cry. She'd have a perfectly reasonable explanation. She'd say I had misunderstood Romanian directness, that I was being unfair, that after everything she'd done for us, I was choosing to attack her over a waiter. She'd make me feel guilty for doubting her. And she'd win, because I didn't have enough yet. What I had was a gut feeling and a data point. What I needed was evidence. So I went back to what I knew. When one of my assembly lines had a fault that kept recurring, something invisible, something you couldn't put your hands on directly, you didn't shut the line down and start yawing. You watched. You gathered information. You built a picture. And then you acted. That night, I went on my laptop. I told Elena I'd been thinking about taking an online course to fill my days. Maybe something on European history or culture. She thought it was a wonderful idea. She patted my shoulder and said it was good that I was keeping my mind active. But I didn't search for history courses. I went to a website called Preply and I hired a Romanian language tutor for 3 sessions a week. My secret investigation had begun. For 6 months, my life ran on 2 tracks simultaneously, and the discipline required to maintain both of them was the hardest thing I have ever done. On the surface, I was the happy American retiree. I smiled at dinner with her friends. I was warm and affectionate. I played the part of the grateful, contented man who had found his second chance. I was, in many ways, giving the performance of my life. Underneath that, 3 times a week, I would close the bedroom door, put on my headphones, and sit down with Anka, my tutor from Bucharest, for an hour of Romanian language instruction. Anka was patient, methodical, and very good at her job. She thought I was a hobbyist, an old man keeping his brain sharp, a sweet, harmless student. I never told her what I was actually doing. I never told her I was building a listening device out of vocabulary lists and grammar exercises. I was learning a language not to speak it, but to understand it when I wasn't supposed to. I started with the basics, as you have to. Greetings, common phrases, numbers. But I pushed Anka constantly toward practical vocabulary, the language of real life. Words for money, words for apartments and ownership and contracts, words for relationships, words for deception, words that people use when they think no one important is listening. Every day, I would sit across from Elena at breakfast or at a cafe and listen to her phone calls, and every day, more and more threads of meaning would begin to pull free from the stream of sound. At first, it was just individual words, like catching a single fish at a time. Bonnie, money. Apartment. That one required no effort. Barbet, man or husband. El new sty, he doesn't know. Then whole phrases began to cohere. After 6 months, I was not fluent. I want to be precise about that. I could not have had a complex conversation in Romanian, but I could follow the thread of an ordinary conversation about everyday subjects. And Elena's conversations, as it turned out, were almost always about very ordinary subjects. It cost me $900. It was the only money I spent in Romania that returned anything at all. The day it all came together was a Tuesday in late spring. A beautiful, warm, sunny afternoon. We were sitting at one of her favorite outdoor cafes. White iron tables, big canvas umbrellas, the old city wall visible from where we sat. I had just passed the 6-month mark of my language study. She was on the phone with a friend named Christina, leaning back in her chair, completely relaxed, her voice light and cheerful. She was laughing. For a moment, one quiet, painful moment, I let myself believe I had been wrong about everything, that I was just a paranoid, grieving old man who had let one incident with a waiter spiral into a delusion, that the woman across the table genuinely loved me, that the apartment genuinely would have my name on it someday. Then I started to listen, really listen, not to the tone, not to the melody of it, but to the words themselves. Her friend must have asked about me, about us, about how things were going, and that's when Elena said it. The words came across the table, clear and unhurried in the afternoon air, carried to me on a small breeze as casually as if she were talking about the weather. "Nu, haber in R," she said. No, he has no idea. My heart didn't lurch. It didn't race. It simply went cold and still, like a piece of metal submerged in ice water. She kept talking, her voice unchanged, cheerful and warm. She called me un bancomat ambulant, a walking ATM. She told her friend that we were buying the apartment together, and she laughed when she said the word together, a small, dismissive puff of air, as if it were the punchline of a private joke. She said that in just a couple more years, the apartment would be all hers, free and clear, with no complications. All she had to do was keep me happy in the meantime. Trebuitor sal tin fericit. I did not move. I did not flinch. I did not blink any more than I normally would have. 40 years of sitting across from union representatives and plant managers and men who were absolutely certain they had the upper hand had taught me something invaluable. You do not give away what you know until you've decided how to use it. The assembly line supervisor in my head simply took one step back, looked at the full picture laid out in front of him, and said, very quietly, "There it is. The flaw in the system. The broken part at the center of the machine. I had the data now. The investigation was over." I raised my coffee cup with a steady hand and took a slow, deliberate sip. I let her laughter settle into the afternoon air around me, and I felt, not anger, not devastation, not the grief I might have expected, just a cold, complete, almost merciful clarity. The kind of clarity you feel when a problem you have been circling for months finally reveals exactly what it is. She hung up the phone a few minutes later and turned to me with that warm smile. The same smile she had been giving me for 18 months, the one I now understood was a performance as disciplined as my own. "That was Christina," she said. "She says hello and sends her love." I held her gaze and nodded. "Tell her I said hello back." We went back to the apartment I had paid for. That evening was perfectly normal in every visible way. She made my favorite Romanian dish, a slow-cooked pork stew with polenta and sour cream, the kind of meal that takes hours to make properly. We sat together and watched an American film she had wanted to see. She laughed at the right moments. She leaned against my shoulder. To any outside observer, it would have looked like a comfortable, ordinary evening between two people who had built a life together. But I wasn't there. I was somewhere else entirely. I was back in Flint, Michigan, walking the assembly line with my clipboard in my hand, moving methodically from station to station, identifying every variable, every dependency, every step that needed to happen in the right order. I was drafting a shutdown procedure. I was writing an exit plan. And when she finally went to sleep, When her breathing settled into the slow rhythm I had listened to for a year and a half, I got up quietly and went to work. I packed one bag, a single carry-on suitcase, passport, wallet, laptop, phone charger, 3 changes of clothes. The things that were mine and only mine. Everything else, the furniture, the kitchen things, the life we had supposedly built together, I left exactly where it was. It was all a sunk cost, and I had spent 40 years learning not to chase sunk costs. I opened my laptop, logged into my Romanian bank account, and transferred every remaining cent, minus exactly $300 for a taxi and a plane ticket, back to my account in the United States. The transfer cleared in minutes. Then I walked into the kitchen, picked up the set of apartment keys from the hook by the door, and set them on the polished granite counter in the center of the kitchen. Gently, without drama. I did not write a note. There was nothing I wanted to say to her that she hadn't already said to someone else on a Tuesday afternoon at a cafe table 3 feet away from me. I walked out of that building at 4 o'clock in the morning. The streets of Brașov were completely silent, the way old European streets get in the deep hours before dawn. Cobblestones damp from a light rain, the church towers dark against a sky just beginning to lighten at its edge. I hailed a taxi and rode to the airport without looking back. I walked up to the ticket counter and bought the first westbound flight available. It was a Lufthansa morning departure to Frankfurt, with a connection to Raleigh, North Carolina. That's where my son lives. As the plane lifted off the runway and banked west, I watched the lights of the city contract below me. The illuminated squares, the church spires, the dark mass of the mountains at the edge of everything. I had arrived in this country with hope so large it had overridden every instinct I'd spent a lifetime developing. I was leaving with nothing but a carry-on bag, a depleted bank account, and something that, surprisingly, felt less like defeat than like relief. I didn't feel like I was losing a dream. I felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was thinking clearly again. The first complete thought I had as the city disappeared beneath the clouds was simple and precise. The supervisor is back in charge. I am telling you this story from the spare bedroom in my son's house in Raleigh. The walls are painted a color that can describe as agreeable gray. There is a single bed and a dresser and a window that looks out onto a quiet suburban street. It is safe. It is quiet. It is, in every way that matters, not a life. Not yet. My son and his wife have been genuinely good to me, and I am grateful for that. But I see the look they exchange sometimes, when they think I'm not watching. It's a particular kind of look. Pity cut through with worry. The look you give to someone who got badly hurt, and you're not quite sure they fully understand the extent of it yet. When the dust had settled enough for me to sit down and do the accounting, I went through it the same way I'd go through an incident report after a line failure. Precise, unemotional, line by line. $12,000 for the first apartment's rent and deposit. $5,000 for a mother's medical emergency that I now have to assume was completely fabricated. $85,000 for an apartment that was legally, formally, and permanently in another woman's name and was never, not for a single day, going to be mine. The $900 I spent on Romanian language lessons was the only expenditure in the entire 18 months that produced a return. It was, dollar for dollar, the most valuable money I spent in that country. The total loss, $102,000. That is an enormous number of hours on an assembly line. My net worth, that's $650,000 I had built over a lifetime of disciplined, unglamorous work, is now closer to $550,000. Not catastrophic. I know that. I know I am fortunate to have anything left, and I know that other men in variations of this same situation have lost far more. But the number is real, and I say it out loud because saying it out loud is part of how you stop lying to yourself about what happened. I am 62 years old. I am in my son's guest room. I am starting over from a place I never, in any version of my future I could have imagined, expected to be. So here are the lessons. This is what I actually bought with that money, and I want you to take them seriously. First, and I need you to hear this clearly, this story is not about Romania. Romania is a beautiful, complicated, remarkable country full of people who are warm and decent and hardworking. My experience was not Romania's fault. This is about the fact that I fell in love with a story, a narrative that was written specifically to appeal to men like me, and I moved my life and my savings for a person I had never properly vetted. I investigated her country, her city, the exchange rate, the cost of living. I never investigated her. Before you move your life and your money for someone you met online, you have to vet the individual with the same methodical rigor you would apply to any other significant investment. Hire a local investigator if you have to. Meet her family. Talk to people who know her in contexts where she isn't performing. Check the story behind the story. Second, and I want to be as direct as possible about this, the moment, the absolute second, you hear the words, "Let's put the property in my name for now. It's just easier for a citizen," you stop. Not slow down. Not ask follow-up questions. You stop. That sentence is not the beginning of a conversation. It is the end of one. It is a 5-alarm fire, and the only correct response is to walk away, regardless of how much you have already invested, regardless of how much you want to believe, regardless of how logical and temporary the arrangement sounds in the moment. There is no version of that sentence that ends well for you. I don't care how sincere her eyes look when she says it. Third, and this is the one that's hardest to say and most necessary to hear if you are a man in the demographic I was in, you are the target. Specifically, intentionally, and professionally, you are the target. Men who are older, who have lost a spouse, who are lonely, who feel that their window for a second chance is closing. Men who are decent and stable and want to be good providers. Those qualities are not invisible to people who do this for a living. Those qualities are the angle. Your decency is the vulnerability. Your hope is the weapon they use against you. That does not mean you don't deserve love or that a real relationship with someone you meet abroad is impossible. It is not. But you have to go in with your eyes open and your instincts engaged, not smothered. My grandmother had a saying I haven't thought about in years. She used to say, "Don't let your heart make promises your head can't keep." I thought I was being smart. I thought I was being brave and deliberate. I was letting my loneliness do my thinking for me and dressing it up as courage. Don't make my mistake. Don't let your hope write a check your common sense can't cash. If my story can save even one person from going through a version of what I went through, then it was worth telling. Subscribe to the channel. We talk about this stuff all the time because almost nobody else is going to tell you the truth.